Hello everyone, welcome to the course Basic Cognitive Processes. I am Dr. Ark Verma from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Now, we have been talking in the last 3 lectures about attention. We have seen that there have been theories of attention which talked about attention as a selective strategy. We also talk about filter theories and bottleneck theories of attention. We were also talking in one of the lectures about how you use attention. Say for example, the first lecture on attention that I took, and I talked about theories of visual search. That was one example wherein you use attention to navigate your environment, wherein you are basically using aspects of attention to look for or to search for particular objects from the environment. We saw that feature search it does basically involve looking for a specific feature, or let us say conjunction search involves looking for a specific set of features, maybe a combination of 1 or 2 features, and how do you actually focus on 1 feature or 2 features and look for a particular object in your environment. We have talked about that in the first lecture. In the second lecture, I talked to you about theories of selective attention. How is it important to select a particular piece of information or object or a location from your environment and work on that, and what are the different theories of selective attention. In the third lecture, we talked about divided attention, and that given that it is a basic and it is a good profitable ability that we have, that we can sometimes, if need arises, focus on more than one stimulus or more than one location at a time, and we looked into some theories of that, and also in the end of that lecture we talked about how, say for example, this divided attention thing can be misused, say for example, for people trying to do 2 tasks at the same time when the task is something as demanding as driving. In this lecture today, I will basically take you to forming a link between attention and perception. Now, if you think of what an individual does while interacting and navigating with the environment, and if you remember some of the earlier discussions we have constantly been talking about the need for selecting some information from the environment and working on it. And in that sense, you would see that attention does not only help us do that, but attention, because it is helping us select and single out some particular region or location or event in time and to attend on that, it is doing something with our perception as well. What happens when you select something, when you attend something, and what happens when you do not attend the object in question. Today, we will try and make this link between attention and visual perception. By the help of some experimental studies, some very famous studies that have been done in attention over the past decades, we will try and make this connection, and we will try and see how this connection can help us better understand the process of attention. Just to again remind you for the overall scope of the course, we have been doing specific cognitive functions, but we have also looked into how these cognitive functions interact with themselves, because that is what the story of cognition has to be about. This is a course on basic cognitive processes, and I am trying to tell you that how these basic cognitive functions interact with each other, sometimes start working together to give you a more holistic experience, to give you more control, and to give you a better handle over interacting with the environment. We have talked about sensation, we have talked about perception. If you remember, the last section on perception was about perception and action. So, how do you perceive environment around and how do you act? This chapter was basically about attention, and today I am going to try and help you to connect attention and perception together. So, if you kind of following all of these lectures in a particular sequence, and if you try and integrate them into a particular conceptual structure, you would want to make attention, perception and action all linked up with each other, and then try and understand how each of these cognitive functions in their own right and in conjunction give an individual a better chance to interact and navigate with the environment. So, with that background, let us try and study one of the very famous phenomena in attentional research, which has been around for quite some time, called inattentional blindness. So, Mack and Rock in 1998, they created a situation in which a person's attention is focused on one particular task, and then they tried to determine whether the person can perceive another stimulus, which is another visual stimulus easily, or he has difficulty in doing that. The observer's task in this kind of setup was basically to indicate the setup. I'll just describe the setup how it looked like. So there was a blank screen, there was a fixation cross. A fixation cross is essentially a plus sign which is presented in the middle of the screen. So the observers were given the task of determining which of the arms of this particular cross is longer. So there is a plus sign, one of these arms, maybe the vertical or the horizontal, will be longer than the other, and this is what the participants were told that you have to figure out and tell, and they were told that you have to do it as quickly and as accurately as possible. One of these trials, while the participants were doing this, a small test object, it could be any particular geometric shape which was also within the clear line of vision of these participants, was presented. Observers were basically then given a recognition test after this, in which they were asked to pick up the object that was presented along with the fixation cross. So if you see the setup is, there are two tasks here. The first task is to determine the length of the arm, which of the arm is longer of this fixation cross, and the hidden task or the other task is to actually determine which of the shapes will be presented randomly at some point in time along with this fixation cross. So this was the setup. Let me give you a demonstration of this right here, right now. Say for example, this is the fixation cross, this is the object, and now can you tell me which was the object presented? I think it kind of went much slower than it would have gone in the typical experiment, but I hope you got the idea. So if you are actually focusing on determining the length of one of these arms of the fixation cross, you will have to look at it in a very focused manner. It will probably not appear as big in the center of the screen. The situation might be slightly different, but the task is just determine which of these arms is longer, and it's a slightly demanding task. And then while you just focused on the arm's length, you will see some of these kinds of figures, some of these geometrical shapes appearing right in front of your eyes, right where this target in question, that is the plus sign, is there. And then later, after asking you which of the arms was longer or which of the ones was shorter, I will present you, or they presented an array of geometrical stimuli, wherein one of these objects which were presented earlier will also be there. So you have to recognize which one of the objects really appeared with the fixation cross, and suppose if you were completely engrossed in the task of judging the arm's length, you will probably not be very good at recognizing this particular visual object. Now this basically, this phenomena has been termed as inattentional blindness. If you are not paying attention to something, you are blind to that. So if you are not really being able to attend to a particular stimulus, now this is the entire setup which was again presented in Goldstein's book of cognitive psychology, figure 4.17. This is the whole setup. So the description of the phenomena is such that if you are not really paying attention to a visual stimulus or an auditory stimulus as it may in your environment, you are almost blind to it. Blind basically means you are not really attending to it. Now remember, we have talked about selective attention and we talked about divided attention, and one of the theories we said that maybe we are still attending that, but for most practical purposes we might still be blind to everything that we have not attended. So to just define this in a more concise way, paying attention to all of these to the vertical and horizontal arms of this fixation cross apparently is making the observers blind to the unattended test object. This phenomenon has been termed as inattentional blindness. Now Mack and Rock demonstrated inattentional blindness using rapidly flashed geometric stimuli, but there have also been other kinds of researches that have shown that similar effects can be achieved in more natural scenarios as well. Okay. So let me describe one of the other kinds of experiment here, again to do with inattentional blindness. So Simmons and Chabris basically in 1999, they created a situation in which one part of a scene is attended and the other part is not. So it is a more natural scenario. They created a 75-second film and they basically showed two teams of 3 players each playing basketball in a more natural kind of a setting, and in the one in white passing the basketball around. So there is the 2 teams playing. There is one team which is white wearing white, the other team might be wearing a colored jersey, and this team is basically following passing the basketball around. Now, observers who were made to watch these movies were asked to count the number of passes. So, a task that is focused their attention to this ball passing activity very well. Okay. So, they are basically attending to this team in white, which is actually passing the ball around. Now, what happens was that after about 45 milliseconds, an event that took around 5 seconds occurs. So, one of these events was, say for example, a person dressed in a gorilla suit walks right through the middle of this movie and right through the middle of these players. Now, after seeing the video, observers, after they actually attended the video, they saw the video, and they were not really told that there will be a gorilla or something like that happening. They were just told to count the passes that have happened. Now, after this thing was going on, the observers were asked whether they had seen anything unusual happen or whether they had seen any more than 6 players or something like that. Nearly half of the observers who saw the movie, around 46% of the observers, they failed to report having seen the event, even though it was clearly visible, even though it was happening right in front of their eyes, but they could not report it. Why they could have missed it is probably because they were too intent, too much caught in counting the ball passes that were made. This is again a figure of that particular movie, just a snapshot from there, presented in Goldstein. So, this basically shows you that there is a gorilla standing right in the middle, and he kind of I've seen that movie, so he kind of does a few activities, tries to gain attention, but if there is somebody who is completely intent on just counting the ball passes and is really very engrossed or concentrated in that task, might still miss noticing the gorilla, and in that sense being blind to whatever is happening. This is another example of inattentional blindness, that which shows us that this is a real phenomena and may happen quite a few times. It might also, you might recall, say for example, if you are in a party or somewhere, you are talking to somebody, there's somebody who there's a other person who passes around, kind of waves at you, and you do not notice because you are too engrossed in a particular conversation. Now, moving further, let me just give you another task. You're seeing this picture here, and now you can tell me whether there is a change in the picture. So, again, I'm not really sure what the video quality will be like, but you can see here and here if you notice any change. Now, what happens here is, again, if I try and do this slightly more closely, you will see that right next to the woman there is a yellow colored poster pasted on that placard, and that yellow poster is not really present, is not available in this picture. So, this is what is happening. This is basically called a change scenario. So, something in the demonstration changes in a blink of a second, and a lot of times, because you are not attending to the whole picture at once, you might miss this change. This particular phenomena is called change detection. Now, Resnick and colleagues, they basically did a very similar experiment in which pictures were alternated in the same way until observers were able to determine what was different about the two pictures. So, they actually presented a whole lot of pictures, and they actually asked the participants to keep track of whether there is any change, or if there is any change, report that. Participants basically were presented this with this kind of sequence of pictures again and again, and it continued until they were able to determine what was different about the two pictures, and found that the pictures had to be alternated back and forth a number of times before the difference was detected. The experimenter had to do it quite a few times to really get that change detected by the participants. Now, this difficulty in detecting changes in scenes is basically called change blindness, proposed by Rensink in 2002. Now, this is again one phenomena that is very demonstrative of the fact that attention is so much more important to select relevant information, to select relevant stimuli from our environment, and do and say for example, if there is important information, you would want to know that. You can say for example, liken this to a scenario when you are going somebody has asked you to look for a particular landmark, and you are kind of going and you do not notice that particular, maybe it is a poster on the road, and you kind of miss it because you are talking, or you kind of attending something else. Okay. So, when Rensink added a cue indicating which part of the scene had changed, participants quickly detected the change. So, this can help if there is a cue which can grab attention and which can orient your attentions towards the site where the change has to be made. So Rensink in that sense he added a cue indicating which part of the scene, so which spatial location in the scene is going to be changed, and that kind of change is going to happen. Then the participants certainly could detect these changes much more quickly. Moving ahead, it's not really often that it's not always that we miss out on such kind of changes in the environment, because there are obviously cues that help us to orient our attention towards such stimuli in the environment. Now there is an importance of these cues. These cues automatically grab our attention, they automatically attract our attention, and they increase therefore the detection accuracy and the speed with which we will respond to these kind of stimuli. Automatic attraction of attention by a sudden visual or auditory stimulus is called orienting of exogenous attention. Exogenous because the locus of the attention is outside the individual. There are obviously a lot of times if you are doing something very interesting, you are kind of or maybe driving or something you are doing, if there is a flash of light or if there is a particular kind of a sound which is distinct from all other sounds, you will certainly get oriented towards it. That is basically called orienting of exogenous attention. Now attentional orientation that occurs when one consciously decides to scan the environment to find a specific stimulus or just to track the environment is called endogenous attention. So the first part I was describing was exogenous attention, where the stimuli themselves attract your attention, they themselves grab your attention and you get oriented towards them. It does not happen always. Sometimes, as if you remember in the visual search phenomenon, you are looking for something. Say for example, on a railway station, or say for example on an airport, you have gone to receive somebody and there are too many people coming out, all of their faces you are scanning, and you are actually looking for a particular face, you are looking for a particular person that you have gone there to pick up. That orienting of your attention, which is basically decided by you, which you are consciously controlling and manipulating, is called endogenous attention. So how you orient your attention in the environment can be of two ways. Either the stimulus is grabbing your attention or you are looking for that kind of stimulus, say for example in a visual search kind of a phenomenon. Now both these types of attention can and cannot involve overt attention. So we will talk about the case where they involve overt attention. What is overt attention? If you remember in the beginning of the attentional chapter, I was talking about overt and covert attention. Overt attention is attention that is manipulated, that is controlled by shifting of your eyes or by moving of your eyes. This definition is taken from Carrasco's work in 2010. Now suppose I am showing you this particular picture and I ask you to find the face of Bob Dylan in this particular picture. So I am kind of again taking it off and I am bringing it on, and now I am asking you that out of all these people here in this picture, what you have to do is you have to look for and find the face of Bob Dylan. What are you doing here? You are consciously directing your attention, probably scanning each of these faces, each of these pictures present. You are going sequentially maybe, or maybe you kind of have a sense and something pops out. You are doing all of that on this picture, and how are you doing this? You are basically moving your eyes. In an eye tracking study, you could actually also find out how do you move your eyes. Overt attention with eye movements is basically can be tracked using a particular device called the eye tracker. What is an eye tracker? Eye tracker is a very simple device, basically a camera and a light source. The light source kind of throws a light ray in your eyes, and that light ray is reflected, and the camera tracks the reflection of this light ray, and in that sense it can track the movement of your eyes, it can track where your eyes are looking at any point in time. So it tracks the movement of eyes from point 1 to point 2, or from one point to another. Now suppose there is this thing, if you are kind of looking at a particular fountain, and there was this study which was done, if you are looking at this picture of the fountain in Bordeaux, France, this is the pattern of eye movements that was observed. So the first point wherein your eyes land and then they start moving all over the picture, the first point is called first fixation. So wherein your eyes landed at the first. All these small dots you can see here, all these yellow dots are called fixations, because the eyes moved from point A to point B and stayed there for some amount of time. That amount could be say for example the minimum amount that a fixation could be is around 80 to 100 milliseconds. Your eyes are staying there and then they are moving towards other point. So these small dots are called fixation points. When you are moving your eyes along these lines from points A to points B, you're doing something called a saccadic eye movement. So what you're doing is you're moving the eye from one fixation to the next fixation, that is saccadic eye movement. Typically, people make about 3 fixations per second when viewing an unfamiliar scene. Something like this: if I give you a scene to scan and tell me and find out something in that particular in that scene, you will be taking around 3 fixations per second. Now, 2 kinds of factors determine how people shift their attention by moving their eyes. First is bottom up factors, basically based on the primary physical characteristics of the stimulus. If there is a bright color, if there is a unusual shape, that might attract your attention better than some other things. So, these are bottom up driven eye movements. The other thing could be the top down based eye movement, based on the relationship between the observer and the scene. When the person looks at the scene and the demands of the task involve the person to scan the scene. Say for example, in the picture wherein I asked you to look for Bob Dylan, what you are doing here is you are basically doing top down governed eye movements. You are basically decided that I have to look for something, and that is why you are moving your eyes over this picture again and again. Some top down determinants we can talk about. So, scene schemas and observers' knowledge about what is contained in the physical scenes. If you are looking at a particular scene, if you are looking at a particular scenario, something about that scene, and in that sense maybe you are looking for something from that scene, and that is basically wherein you are doing your top down kind of eye movement, you are deciding. I can take one example. When Vo and Henderson in 2009, they showed observers pictures like the ones show you right away. Observers looked longer at the printer than the pen. I will just show you this picture right away. If you see these pictures, again is again a scene of the kitchen, but here you can see that there is a pan in the first picture, but there is a printer on the second picture at the cooktop. Now, there is something interesting about that scene, isn't it? You do not expect to find a printer in the kitchen, especially over the cooktop. Okay. So, because there is something very specific about that thing that actually made people look longer at that printer. So, the fact that people look longer at things that seem out of place in a particular scene kind of tells us that attention is being affected by their general knowledge about the scene, their general knowledge of what is usually to be found in a particular scene. Eye movements can also happen, or say for example attention can also move from one place to another without moving your eyes. So, I was hinting about this, I think, in one of the earlier classes as well. The movement of attention without the movement of eyes is referred to as covert attention. So, shifting of attention without moving of eyes is called covert attention. There have been a lot of studies in which covert attention has been investigated, and they have used a procedure called pre-cueing. So, in which a participant is presented with a cue that indicates where the stimulus is most likely to appear. So, pre-cueing has been used to study 2 kinds of attention. I will just tell you. So, first is the location based attention. Michael Posner did these kind of studies. So, Michael Posner and colleagues were interested in answering the following question. The question was, does attention to a specific location improve our ability to respond rapidly to a stimulus presented at that location? Say for example, if there is a location and I have already told you that I am going to present a number here, and then I quickly present some numbers and ask you later that which were the numbers presented here, because I have already told you the location, because you have already oriented your attention towards that particular location, your performance will be slightly better as compared to if I am not really telling you where the stimulus is going to appear and then I present a particular stimulus. That will be called location based. Say for example, in this experiment which was again borrowed from Goldstein's book, I think it is a typical Posner's paradigm. You can say for example have the first thing wherein there is an arrow appearing over the fixation cross. So, arrow points towards the right side and the stimulus appears on the right side. Okay. So, it kind of basically already orients your attention towards the right side, or on an invalid trial it kind of points towards the left, but the stimulus still appears on the right. That is called a invalid trial. So, the valid trial is where the cue is successfully predicting the location where the object will appear. Invalid trial is when the cue is not successfully predicting where the object will appear. Now, it has been seen that when participants are given tasks like these, and there could be many variations, valid cues are responded to much faster. So, people will respond much faster targets presented on pre-cued locations, because what has happened is, even though you've not moved your eyes, generally the time period is much lower as to allow eye movements, even though you've not moved your eyes, you've shifted your attention to that pre-cued location, and that is why any stimuli presented at those locations are attended to faster and more accurately. The results of these experiments indicate that observers were reacting more rapidly on valid trials than on invalid trials, leading to the conclusion that information processing is more effective at the place where attention is directed. These and other similar results have given rise to the idea that attention is like a spotlight. It's like a lens that improves processing when directed toward a particular location. You know, I was giving that example of a torch. If you're in a dark room, your attention is like a torch. You put your attention somewhere, that is the part you're getting most information out of. Now, the other kind of attention one could talk about is object-based attention. Now, when you select a particular object, experiments have also shown that attention can also be associated with specific objects. Experiments studying object-based attention have shown that when attention is directed to one place on an object, the enhancing effect of this attention spreads throughout that object. If you're looking at a particular pen, or if you're looking at a particular small object, then the attention will kind of cover that entire object. I'll show you an example. So, Egley and colleagues, they did this experiment. They asked participants to keep their eyes on the fixation cross, then on one end of the rectangle was briefly highlighted. I'll show you the figure right away. This was the thing, participants were basically asked to keep their eyes on the fixation cross, but one end of these rectangles is brightly highlighted, and there is where the target could appear. Okay, so let us see what happens. I'll just describe this in more detail. So, this basically, this highlighting acts as a cue signal that indicates where a target, a dark square that is, could appear, and that is what they have to detect. Now, the participant's task is here is to press a button when the target appeared anywhere on that display. The reaction times were found much faster when the target appeared on where the cue signal predicted that it would appear. So, again, something similar to the last finding. If you pre-cue attention to a particular space or a particular object, in this case, your performance in terms of detection and accuracy is going to be much better. However, the most important finding, however, in this set of experiments is that participants responded much faster when the target appeared within the same rectangular object, location B, than when it appeared at another location C. Now, note that B and C are at the same distance from A. So, this is the thing, if the object appeared in B versus the object appeared in C, participants were much faster at B, even though the distance from from A to B and A to C is exactly identical. What is the difference? The difference is that B is lying on the same object as A, or as the cued location, but C is on a different object. So, this was the apparently enhancing effect of attention, and that has spread within the entire rectangle. So, even though the cue is at A spatial location, or let us say on that particular object, there is some enhancement occurring at B as well, because B forms part of the same object. This is basically called the same object advantage. Location and object based attention. So, this is basically typically an example of location based and object based attention put together for you. So, location based is just like you are putting a spotlight at a particular location. Object based is when you are looking at a particular object and your attention is enhanced throughout that particular object. So, if you move the object, your attention moves along with the object. In the location based, if you change the location, the attention does not really shift. It is a very specific location that you have selected to attend. So, I hope these demonstrations, I am kind of going to end here, these demonstrations about how attention interacts and affects your visual perception might have been useful for you to realize how attention is an important process and how attention affects your abilities of perception as well. Similar examples could have also been taken with attention and auditory perception as well, but I am not really talking about them because they are kind of not in the scope of the course. Thank you.